Thank you for the opportunity to present today on big infrastructure projects in small jurisdictions. We will cover an introduction to Mott MacDonald. We will look at our experience, the things that need to be considered in setting up for success in major infrastructure, the ingredients, the culture, the investment, and the key steps. And we will explore case studies and key learning from working within an island community of Jersey and from the transformation of the world's most prestigious botanic gardens at Kew. Questions will be welcomed at the end. I'm Adam Rees-Leonard, and I'm an account lead and project director within Mott MacDonald. I'm also joined with my colleagues Rob, Ian, and David. So about Mott MacDonald. We are truly a global advisory, engineering and management consultancy. We have global reach and very much local delivery. We are centred around social outcomes, delivery excellence and digital innovation, transforming our clients, businesses and communities. We are an employee-owned company with over 18,000 staff. We are second in size to John Lewis, and we work in over 135 countries. So now we'll look at setting up for success and what we have learned from other programmes. We will look at this from 4 different perspectives: what the ingredients are for success, the behaviours and culture that can maximise success, and what the optimum shape to attract investment might be, and what the pathway for turning ideas into reality might look like. My colleagues Rob and Ian will then turn these into life through the context of 2 case studies, Jersey and Kew Gardens. So the ingredients for success is so important that there is a golden thread that flows through a clear vision, objectives and inter-benefits to provide a strategic alignment and collective focus, and that there is an informed, intelligent client with the right level of governance and capability to champion, focus and support timely and effective decision making. Any major infrastructure investment should be seen as an opportunity for transformation that will bring opportunities and future resilience and growth to the island. All stakeholders will need to be engaged and feel engaged and valued. Engagement needs to be timely, prioritised and absolutely clear messaging to ensure alignment. A collaborative and inclusive approach works best, a one island team approach to maximise and align stakeholder support. Reliable funding from public and private sector, including mainland and potential overseas, is needed so that there is confidence to plan ahead and achieve an optimised pathway. A cost-effective and capable supply chain should be established that complements and upskills as necessary with off-island capability. Island environmental impacts that could materialise need to be understood, considered and mitigated. Social value outcomes need to be considered and agreed from the outset to ensure a legacy. Now looking at behaviour and culture for success. Where we have seen the greatest success on schemes is where there is a clear ownership and sponsorship in the government space. That this is high priority on a personal level to drive through for the benefit of the community. Delivery credibility needs to give stakeholders and investors confidence of success and benefit. A supportive culture is also needed as the team develops and celebrates early successes. Setbacks will occur. The team will need to be resilient and adaptive, learn and evolve. For big schemes, thinking needs to be holistic, considering infrastructure, technology, processes and people, including island legacy. It is best to place the community centrally in the thinking, developing a sense of place and ownership within the community. A transparent culture is best, with full openness and honesty, and are highly respectful to challenges to unite and optimise the solution space and maintain support. So now looking at how we might, the ways to organise and attract investment. Firstly, stakeholder alignment helps to create one vision and one voice. With this, clarity and vision can be promoted with clear link to the benefits. This clarity and alignment enables early investor engagement to gain an understanding of the likely investor groups and what their requirements and aspirations are. With this understanding, schemes can be designed for investment and optimised around investment. Established investment support mechanisms can be leveraged to promote and market to potential investors, enabling greater reach. The investors will want to see delivery confidence and clarity so that they can have confidence in timely returns. Consideration might also be given to reducing investment barriers. Much of this can be achieved through a clear government policy position. Incentives can also be looked at, such as further reduction in tax duties. These measures are being used on the mainland to attract free-port investment. So what are the steps to turn ideas into reality, and how long does it take? Firstly, the project needs to be formally initiated. Our project needs to be formally initiated and options developed alongside public engagement. A single concept for pre-application public consultation could take 1 to 3 years. It could take typically a further 1 to 2 years for a single solution to be developed and for planning to be submitted. Detailed design and construction planning would typically take a further 1 to 2 years, with construction delivery starting in 3.5 to 7 years' time. A construction could last 2 to 5 years before being ready for operational use. I've summarised the ingredients for success, the behaviours and culture, how to attract investment and the pathway to turning ideas into reality. My colleagues Rob and Ian will now turn these into life in the context of 2 case studies, Kew Gardens and Jersey. Rob, over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, I'm Rob Hilton. I'm a programme director and work across several major infrastructure projects within our advisory portfolio. I also have family on the island, so I've been coming to the island for 10, 12 years and feel like I know it very well. So I'm going to spend about the next 10 to 12 minutes sharing a case study where we, Mott MacDonald, were appointed by Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, to oversee the revitalisation and redevelopment of many infrastructure projects across their 300-acre world-leading botanic garden and scientific estate in West London. So Kew is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and first opened in 1759. It's one of the top tourist attractions in London, with millions of visitors each year. As well as that, it centres the world-leading botanical studies, science and education, which is not a part of Kew that most people know. They're the world-leading botanic scientists, and actually a big component of the work that they do on their grounds is scientific activity. So the site comprises of 45 grade-listed buildings, 1 and 2, and it's a grade 1 listed landscape. So the site has 180,000 living plants, over 2 billion wild plant seeds at a Millennium Seed Bank, which is heavily controlled, historic library collections, art and archive collections. They had developed a master plan, but they knew they could not achieve this within their organisation. It's not business as usual activity. They recognised that. So they didn't have the in-house capability to do it alone. They were looking for a long-term, multidisciplinary partner to help them develop, define and deliver their long-term vision for the future of the gardens and its built environment. These plans included transformational developments such as new catering facilities, major refurbishments of iconic buildings, historic conservations, site-wide infrastructure enhancements, and also needed to address safety and compliance concerns. All required a blend of specialist and project delivery skills. Due to the sensitive nature of both the gardens and the built environment, there were many interested parties, all of whom were very passionate about their specialities and they wanted to contribute into any plans that were developed. This involved us developing a structured process to manage their input at the right time. So the types of stakeholders, so Kew directors and their board, chaired by the chairman of the bank, Barclays Bank, subject matter experts such as scientists, botanists, gardeners, estate owners, Historic England, Natural England, London Borough of Richmond, the Environment Agency, the Department of Environment, Fisheries and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, English Heritage, the National Trust, and then of course major benefactors, donators and patrons. So a complex network of stakeholders. So, for those of you who don't know Kew, these are some of their iconic buildings and some of their iconic landscapes, all with their own complexities. So this is my version of their abridged vision. Deliver transformational change, remain iconic and enhance the public's experience. They needed to source funding to deliver their long-term vision. This would need to come from multiple sources, but there needed to be a critical mass of funding before alternate sources could be explored. That's really important. Someone has to come in big and then others will follow. They had a vision. That needed to be translated into tangible deliverables. Outcomes are typical in a vision, but they need to be turned into concepts, project briefs that can be understood and taken forwards. Whilst this is typical of a client role, we helped them so that we could all work with them. There's nothing worse than a badly written brief. They need to understand and develop their priorities, but also they needed help with articulating their key and core issues. Their vision was a combination of new and improved facilities. However, safety, compliance, aged asset conditions, they all needed to be considered, but not only considered, communicated. The client didn't have the requisite skills to really understand the condition of their assets. So they needed to define their priorities, develop a plan. So using a systematic process, we created a holistic, high-level, prioritised plan that everyone bought into. The important thing is everyone bought into that plan, and I touch on why in a bit. We could then further develop that plan and get that plan more increasingly accurate. They needed to secure capability to deliver the plan and ultimately their vision. We needed to consider the different ways that that plan could be delivered. One contractor, multiple contractors, types of contracts to engage them under. We also needed to consider not just that they had the right capability, but they also demonstrated the right culture to work with us and the client in a sensitive and complex environment. They needed to build some cool stuff within budget, on time, minimal disruption, easy. They needed to fix some stuff as well. So how was this achieved? Firstly, we had to draw on advisory specialists to translate their vision into a tangible programme of work and draft a business case to secure the funding. To secure funding, we use best practice techniques such as the 5-case model. The critical mass of funding actually came from DEFRA. That enabled Kew to explore other options for additional funding for specific projects. That type of funding came from philanthropic donations, fundraising, scientific grants as examples. The total budget from DEFRA was circa 65 million, and then we raised an extra 20 million through other examples. We mobilised the core management team. Importantly, it was co-located at Kew. This was essential for us to jointly design and develop the culture for successful delivery. We ran their programme and we worked with Kew to establish the required capabilities needed. There were many stakeholders to consult as each of the projects were scoped and developed. We helped Kew define how the overall programme would be governed, how projects would be structured and sponsored. We also needed to ensure that each of the directorates understood each other's priorities and challenges. Everyone had a role to play, and they needed to be connected in their thinking whilst maintaining a focus on the whole plan, the long-term plan and the outcomes it's delivered. We helped them get into the right mindset, and the reason why they needed to be in the right mindset, there was disruption. It was inevitable. However, we minimised that through thorough planning and proactive and timely communications. The key thing was I had to deliver quite a few strong messages to them. We will have to disrupt your operations. You cannot build things without disruption. The principles of how we developed the team, which was the client, the consultant and the contractor, were based around a one-team approach. We approached this using 3 collaborative pillars: aligned values and objectives, trust open communication, collaborative initiatives employed early. Employed early is really important. No one likes things being changed when things are being built. That's really expensive. So let's get the thinking done early. Let's develop that as part of the brief, and then the brief is clear, and obviously everyone knows what they're doing. All of that became the birth of Kew Capital Development Programme. We created our own identity. Whilst all of this could be perceived as non-essential, actually quite the opposite. To Adam's point earlier, this became the golden thread through the organisation, through our team, and it was imperative. Everyone needed to be on the same page. We knew that through the prioritisation process, not all the projects were exciting, new or shiny, and some were very important due to safety or compliance challenges, and therefore there would be competing wants and needs. There wasn't an infinite amount of funding available to do exactly as everybody wanted. Compromise inevitably had to be made. Many of the buildings were complex, grade listed or specialised. An example being the Palm House, which had to be maintained at a tropical humidity and temperature all year round, and some of the plants were very precious. Therefore, the width and breadth of the projects needed to draw on a range of technical specialists and generalists and broader experience across our business and within our supply chain. We needed to do detailed assessments of their existing infrastructure. Whether they were to be refurbished or revitalised, the client didn't necessarily fully understand the condition of its own assets. So that's the non-sexy, unfun stuff where you're fixing stuff and it just carries on doing the same thing, but it's essential to maintain the operation. So by doing those assessments, that allowed us to better understand the challenges that we had, the interfaces we needed to manage, and ultimately that translates into understanding your risks, more accurate estimates in terms of time and cost, which therefore gives you more certainty in delivery. By scoping out each of the projects, we created an estimate, we understood how long it was going to take, we knew the risks, we knew the interfaces, and therefore we could manage them because they were identified. We prioritised using a systematic approach, and ultimately that became the Kew plan. And that Kew plan was bought into by all of the complex stakeholders, internal and external. And that formed the baseline of how we were going to measure progress. Each project required rigorous planning to ensure that any of the plans developed were fully supported by those stakeholders, internal and external. And ultimately, a project goes nowhere without successful planning consent. So the work that you have to do to get your consent is equally as important as going on to build it. So each of those stakeholders had their own needs, their own wants, and they needed to understand that in some instances, and in many instances, we had to negotiate for all parties so that no one got exactly what they want and someone else didn't quite get what they want. We had to raise and lower the bar so that we had a balanced approach, and it was negotiated in a constructive way so that nobody felt like they didn't get anything and somebody felt they got everything and vice versa. So we had everyone in the grey. Not everyone got everything they wanted. As I said, constructive compromise. But that allowed us to optimise each of the projects to both maximise value for money, but also maximise the opportunity of the funding to deliver the whole programme. And that's a great outcome. Get more for your money. In a similar way to how we were engaged through a competitive procurement process, we, as the programme management team, determined the best approach to engage a contractor under a 5-year framework. And the reason why we did this is because we saw some distinct advantages. You only go through one round of procurement. Procurement is expensive. The framework contractor could mobilise a core team, became part of our one team, and embrace the culture that we'd designed for success. They are a component of that. They were able to build their knowledge base up and fully understood the constraints. They were able to build long-term relationships with the Kew personnel just like we did. It allowed us to develop one set of processes for how projects were developed and delivered. We were able to develop a one-way approach working with Kew Estates and the directorates that owned the assets, how new, refurbished or fixed assets were handed back into operations. It's one thing building something, but at some point someone has to take it, own it and operate it. And that is very, very challenging in projects if you don't bring the people with you. So it enabled us to have a joint plan, certainty on costs and timescales. We had direct contractor intelligence. It's one thing us as consultants estimating, but of course the market might be saying it costs something different. So having that contractor intelligence is really important, and they're in the tent with us. So that allows us to define and manage the risks better and share the risks. And we needed to do a lot of work with the client for them to recognise that just because you think the contractor's priced the risk doesn't mean the risk has gone away. It always sits with the client, ultimately. So having a well-informed client and a mature governance arrangement, adopting best practice project management, meticulous planning, sensitive to design and construction techniques, using materials complementary to the environment, good oversight, stakeholder management and communications, this enabled us to deliver successful projects over the 5-year timeframe. And we fixed quite a bit of broken stuff too, which the client wasn't particularly excited about. So this is the gardens. And I do appreciate you can't read this, but it's just to give you a perspective of the 300 acres and the complexity of the built environment and how it's integrated with the landscape. And then this is the plan of all the activity that we were doing around the site. It was extensive. It was disruptive. We had to sequence it. There was many different stakeholders. You know, dealing with the scientists is very different to dealing with botanists. It's very different to dealing with people who own buildings, people who look after the grade listed buildings. All have their own complexities and sensitivities. So the garden had many constraints. So seasonal arboretum constraints when they're digging certain plants up and planting new plants, in layman's terms, which is how I operated while I was there. 364 days of the year public at site. Sensitive landscapes, grade listed buildings, complex site access, annual private seasonal functions and events, controlled environments. To deliver all of this was only possible because the stakeholders, the client, the consultant and the contractor worked collaboratively to one plan, and all parties knew they had a role to play. We delivered over 200 activities. Some included new arboretum, new welfare facilities, new headquarters, refurbishment of glass houses. Turns out they're not called greenhouses. I got told off for calling them greenhouses. New cafes. We refurbished the Palm House, which was a very complex building, as I mentioned earlier. To do that, we had to build a controlled decant facility as we sectionally worked through the building and took plants out, refurbished one bit, and then obviously put the plants back and moved on. So a lot of sequencing, and you'll hear Ian saying his planning. It's really important. And I could go on. We built a new children's garden. We revitalised some children's play areas, and then we did some infrastructure capital works. Fire risk assessments, really boring, all the way up to putting new power on site and distributing it around a Grade 1 listed landscape. So, in addition to the physical projects delivered at Kew, they had a much better understanding of their site infrastructure. We upskilled the client team, improved their delivery processes and governance arrangements, which are still embedded within their organisation today. So actually, the legacy goes beyond just what was built and what was fixed. Actually, we upskilled the client as well, and that they got a lot of value from having the right consultants engaged at the right time. So hopefully that was of interest, and I've highlighted some key ingredients for successful delivery. Thanks for your time and attention, and I'll hand over to Ian.
Good morning. I'm Ian Rowley. I'm the Programme Director for the Ports of Jersey redevelopment, and that's the harbour for St Helier town. I'm going to build on the points that Adam's already made, joining in quite often with Rob as well, but I want to start with sort of providing a short overview of what the Jersey programme is, and a little bit of insight in terms of how we are going about in terms of delivering that. So in terms of Jersey, our work as Mott MacDonald is with a managed service provider. So there's two projects, we're airport and harbour. We provide within that MSP, Programme Project Management, what we call the Project Management Office. So basically it's everything to do with commercial, contract management, risk, procurement, project controls, quality assurance, in essence, the engine room of the whole governance of that programme. They sit here right on my shoulder, continually whispering in my ear, which is great because this is how it all works together as a team. We're also providing engineering, design and environmental services and social value. In essence, we are the sole provider to provide the services necessary to be able to develop a program of this nature. We have circa 40 full-time employees, with about 15 of those who are basically co-located on the island. Today, though, I'm actually going to concentrate on the harbour. So in essence, the port's made up of a number of areas, each with very specific functions. It's been built up over many decades, but one of the key themes is the history has been built over many centuries, and that's actually quite critical, as you'll see, particularly when we start talking about sense of place. They're all intrinsically linked. The challenge to us is to make sure that we consider the impact of any development we actually do, and that we actually are enhancing and actually safeguarding that port. So in essence, we have down the bottom left-hand side at the moment is the Elizabeth Harbour, Elizabeth Terminal, where all the roll-on, roll-off come. We have to the right here is La Colette, which is basically the blue economy. In the middle, we have New North Quay. At the moment, that's where the Lolo, the sort of the containers, the load on, load off, big crane in there that brings everything into the actual harbour itself. There is a central spine called Albert Pier, and again, this is where the history of this comes out. Albert Pier, obviously from Queen Victoria's days, and that itself has such a historic context. Whatever we do, we can't lose that. Presently, apart from that, there's obviously the St Helier Marina and the Elizabeth Marina, see on the left-hand side. Those are continually flooded for the sort of leisure craft, etc. And then, of course, we've got the old mud moorings just to the north side of, on the inside of that yellow line, and that's the old English and French harbours. The infrastructure is definitely in need of replacement. Ports of Jersey very much recognise this, but also they're looking to its future needs, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime development opportunity. Going forward, we developed two kinds of frameworks, a framework for development and a framework for delivery. The approach to consolidate the port operations. So first of all, we'll start with the Brown. The Brown is basically going to be the Elizabeth Harbour rolling around to La Colette. That is basically where all the Ro-Ro and Lo-Lo operations will move into, and basically everything that comes on and off the island will be through that one place. What then that leaves is to be able to release other areas of the port that we then can actually, working with Ports of Jersey and their stakeholders, to actually create leisure, recreation, residential. The yellow arrows, they are coming from the St Helier town. This isn't just about the port. This development would not work if it's all very inward looking. The idea is that we connect to the St Helier town, we connect to other developments. There's the southwest St Helier development at the moment being managed by JDC, who are an arm's length company of the governments of Jersey. So unless we actually align and connect this, everything's going to be, the idea is that we need to leave behind a legacy. We need to leave behind something that people can actually buy into, they want it, and the whole thing is connected together and functions correctly. Don't ever underestimate the preparation to undertake programs of this nature. They are very discrete in nature, they have very specific timelines, and it is not something that you can resource from a business as usual. We started with an initial gap analysis, working with Ports of Jersey. What skills are missing? How can these be addressed? Is it through us, or should it actually be in-house within Ports of Jersey itself? I'm going to cover a couple of points that Rob picked up. It's about creating this environment, open, honest, transparent. If you don't have that, you will end up with a transactional form of way of working, and that will defeat the whole object of this fantastic opportunity. That though also links in with the wider stakeholder groups as well that we actually are working with very much so. There have been challenges, there are going to be challenges. Programs of this nature always do. But we need to create that network so that we can deal with it. Communication here is critical. We've got to enable that escalation up and down the chain to seek this resolution of the issues. We spent quite a bit of time in the early days developing a roadmap. This roadmap was to basically get the program up and running. You can talk and talk and plan, but at the end of the day, a client will want to see action. You want to see actual movement and see progress. So a roadmap helps to create that and creates that momentum to get us moving and get going forward, but also going forward all in the same direction. We mapped out an organogram. What's an organogram? So we had, you have the very top, the sort of the main board. Then we had sort of project boards that we've set up for each of the individual projects as we're working. From both sides, there's us, but there's also the Ports of Jersey wider network who are very much part and need to buy in and will provide that technical, commercial, and experience and knowledge necessary for us to work and develop this. From that organogram, what rolled out of that was to understand and work with Ports of Jersey again to look at the sort of key roles, the project sponsor, the senior responsible officer, the project leads, but also more importantly, the end user, the person who's actually going to receive the keys at the end. If they're not there in amongst what we're doing, then you're going to have problems. So they're very much there with us. Governance is absolutely critical, and it's what we do, particularly in terms of delegation, change control, auditing and communication. We did spend quite a bit of time on creating an identity for this program. It's something so that people recognize and actually can come together and understand what it is this development is about. It helps break down the corporate barriers, and it gives a common purpose for the team and stakeholders as a whole. Something that, again, Rob picked up, the alignment of values and cultures in the client with us as well. It's fundamental to make this work. Again, it's to ensure there's no transactional situations arising. Time and effort has been spent on onboarding. What's onboarding? So when we get new people coming on board and actually starting to work with us, they need to understand what our objectives are. They need to understand what are behaviours that are required to actually make this work. Need to understand how are they actually going to, what part do they actually play? It doesn't matter whether it's client, consultant, or the wider supply chain. You all need to go through this process. It does ensure a very consistent message, clarity over the objectives, and as I said, the expected benefits. In terms of the delivery, we clearly set out the vision, the objectives and the benefits. And you'll hear this now for the third time, but you'll hear it the third time because it's important, that golden thread. It works all the way through. Otherwise, you just end up with chunks of work with absolutely no commonality between any of it. Where that leads into the project briefs, the scope and deliverables, what's expected, what it is that we're actually building, understanding the basics of cost, time and quality. I think sometimes people can overcomplicate matters, but really those are the key fundamental building blocks: time, cost, quality. I've mentioned about co-location of the team. It builds trust. It develops long-term relationships. Virtual has a place, but there's nothing that can actually be better than face-to-face. That is why that we have this mixture of on-island full-time employees as well. Understanding the local context and the dynamics of the communities we work in, that was a very early enabler. We need to know the audience, bring everybody along with us. We do undertake regular communication of our vision and desired outcomes. It's about trying to capture hearts and minds. The brand linking back to the identity is important. Going to just touch a little bit on procurement. It is not an easy market at the moment. With inflation, with the after effects of the pandemic, the lack of skills, we're also finding the way that people think about risk, deal with risk, has really changed. And a good starting point was we undertook a market analysis within Jersey, and then we did the UK, and then we did Europe. The whole point was to try and understand the links between what is on the island, what needs to be brought to the island, how can we work with the island. It's about linking the scope and deliverables and how can we best buy our requirements. Understand the criteria of success. Is it cost? Is it time? Is it cost and time? You can't have everything. There has to be a bit of give and take on both sides. It is important to get that right, because if you don't, it gets mixed messages all the way down the line. Consider how the packages are let. Elizabeth Harbour is an example. There is a marine section where we're going to do quite a lot of dredging and build a new marine deck. And then we're on land where we're building you'll see a picture in a minute, of a new terminal building. These are actually very different skill sets. So we're thinking very hard about how we package that up so we actually focused on the right supply chain, but also in terms of the level of risk. Do you break it down into small groups in terms of trying to manage it? That means more administration, but the risk is less if something goes wrong, but it's also about, again, attracting the right supply chain to your understanding to get your development completed. In terms of engagement with stakeholders, don't ever underestimate the power of meaningful, and I underline the word meaningful, and timely engagement. Last year, we undertook quite an extensive public engagement process. We did follow that up with a lot of information so they understood what had been discussed, but also what decisions had been made and why had those decisions been made. Again, it's about clarity. It's about bringing people along with you. We developed very clear work cost breakdown structures. And again, Rob has already mentioned, plan again. You can never plan enough. I think the whole process of these kind of developments, it's a very iterative process. The design is iterative. You don't just sit in one day, design it, that's it. You don't plan it, that's it. Because you have to then test it, you have to break it, and then you have to see how you put it back together again. Training is very much factored into our approach. By example, working with Ports of Jersey, we've actually undertaken NEC contract training. It's the former contract we're going to be using. It's that client, consultants and supply chain. You learn together, you create that open approach. And finally, just on this point, we continually assess our progress and how we're doing, our way of working. So we actually do quite lessons learned. Can be tough because it has to be a 360. But you have to. If you don't, you're always going to be continually making the same mistakes time and time again. And again, we've got a very large team on island, off island. That includes Ports of Jersey. People need to feel that they're actually part of it. They need to have their say. It is a powerful tool, but it's one definitely to be used. Create that team synergy, but above all else, enjoy it. We're not at that stage yet, but we are considering the program projects, how they will actually move into business as usual. What structures and skills will be needed? How will that handover be managed? It's about transformational change. How can the opportunities afforded by this program unlock all the expected benefits? It should all be encapsulated within the project lifecycle, the cradle to grave. What are the future needs for training and resourcing? Consider resilience of the operations and the impact on the day-to-day delivery of those operations and at handover. What are the contingencies? What are the business critical activities that can't break? The picture at the top, that's in our planning application, and that's the new terminal. Port of Jersey really keen that when people come to the island, that it's not exactly a wow factor, but it's that it has something that people want to see, and when they leave as well, it sort of really helps in terms of that experience as people come to not just the harbour, because this is Jersey, this is the island of Jersey, it's the doorway, it's the gateway. The one at the bottom, that's you got Elizabeth Marina, which is existing in the bottom. That's the back end of our terminal, and then we're looking out towards the new, our proposed approach in terms of the Elizabeth Marina. Developing economic growth for both the port and the businesses who actually do rely on that port. It's about connecting those communities, both within the estate, but also outside, whether it's businesses, general public, young or adult. Sustainability absolutely embedded within the harbour functions, considering our impact on the environment. Come back to again, I said about the history in one of my, probably right at the start, about the heritage and culture. With the history of Jersey, this is front and centre of our designs. It informs our approach to development. We take the past, we got the present, and we look at the future. How we're ensuring those connections are not lost. And providing a very welcoming, inclusive, accessible space. It's not just a place to work or pass through. It's trying to create a place that is a place to visit. Within these objectives, there are some sort of key thoughts on the outside that we are considering as we look forward. Evolution of future ferries. It's a real hot topic at the moment with climate change and the way in which we're actually moving forward. How do we actually future-proof our designs? Maintaining that safe and resilient harbour operation. 98% of everything that goes on the island comes through this port. It is the lifeline of Jersey. It cannot break. Understanding the need for this coherent sense of place, Jersey's harbour, and investing in the public realm. Taking cognizance of these adjacent properties and projects, it can't be just inward looking. And affordability, it is a continual headache, particularly with inflation running away, etc. But these are all the aspects that we are looking at, and therefore consider how you buy, how you procure the works. One large lot, small lots, it's there's an analysis we take every time as we go through it. So these are the sort of things going through our mind to meet and try and make sure that we get the realisation of the benefits. So our team, how are we delivering this? So we brought together a team that hopefully reflects the experience and knowledge of large-scale programmes, but has that local context. So us as Mott MacDonald, as I said, we're bringing together design and project management, but we're also working with, and not working with, they're part of our team. They're in this circle. An architectural practice, a planning consultant, and an aligned engineering design consultant. They bring that local knowledge. They bring that local context. We also have an ex-Dover capital projects manager. He provides that sort of operational experience perspective. And then we have a sense of place to capture the essence of the place. But it's key that this team isn't considered separate. The client is front and centre and very integral to how we're actually working together. It's that one team, not transactional. We believe it reflects the skills and specialisms required with a very collaborative, multidisciplinary approach, which is key to the success of this. I will like to mention just one thing, health and safety. I'm not here to talk about health and safety, but there is a particular element in the regulations. It's the Construction Design and Management 2015. There's a particular sentence there, sufficient time and resources are allocated. If you don't allow the time to design, if you don't allow the time to develop, if you haven't got the resources or the right resources, it's going to make life more difficult. It is a real key part of how we're actually working. But we do this through our behaviours. So to summarise, first, act in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation. That is clause 10 of the NEC4 contract. I'm not here to talk about contracts, but for us, that's absolutely critical for any supply chain who actually comes to work with us. That's the kind of behaviours we want. But actually, I think that sums up nicely the behaviours that we're trying to develop throughout the whole life cycle of this project and programme. And finally, getting that balancing act. So it's that balance between industry best practice, but also the communities we work with, the benefits that they can also bring. It's a two-way street. It's not just about someone coming in, bringing it and leaving. It's about a legacy, but it's also about learning as well. I learned a lot in Jersey already, you know, because that's what you do. You have to. If you don't have that open mind, you ain't going to achieve anything. So thank you. That concludes my presentation, and I'm going to hand back to Adam.
Thank you for the opportunity to present today. We have looked at the ingredients for success, the behaviours and the culture, and how to attract investment and how to turn ideas into reality. We've looked at this through the lens of two different case studies, the Kew Gardens and also from the perspective of Jersey. We would now welcome any questions, please. I think we're going to sit down over here.
If I could just ask, you probably hear me without this anyway.
Yeah.
If I could just ask the gentleman who's in charge of the Port of Jersey. I was in Jersey quite recently.
Yes.
And I've been there 2 or 3 times. I was there just prior to COVID, and I was then there 10 years before COVID. And during that decade, I was surprised at the amount of development that had gone on in St Helier through presumably primarily the Jersey Development Corporation. What I kind of wanted to know is, did the Jersey States compulsory purchase that land from private owners, or did they already own it? Because it all seemed fairly seamless, that growth, rather than piecemeal. But I know it's been done in phases. And I know that's maybe just outside the port, but you probably know the answer to that. And also, what's the time scale for what you're doing?
Okay, so 2 things there. In terms of your first question, the way it normally operates on Jersey, particularly with the JDC, the planning, there's the island plan. That is fundamental to looking forward in terms of the development and what is required. From that, from the sort of main policy, then the officers are looking at land that they already have. They then work with JDC to develop a brief of particular areas to bring that land back into use, basically. But there are other areas that are privately funded and privately developed as well. So there's a real mixture there. You've also got Andean Homes, who are they do the social housing with Ports of Jersey, with Governments of Jersey. So again, it's about they've identified areas which need to be brought back to life, and that's how they actually work with that. In terms of the programme, how long have we got? We'll be well into 2030 and beyond for this. You have to understand, one of my things there was about affordability. It's about, you've got to manage the resources, and resources both in cash, resources, both financial resources, personal resources as well. The island is and Ports of Jersey, they have a limited group of people. They have their own business to run the port and run the airport. So it's about trying to smooth out so that we keep the momentum going. A lot depends also on what sort of opportunities may come along. Some may come out, out of other organisations that they suddenly see an opportunity and therefore work towards it. But the key thing is fundamentally is getting that Elizabeth Harbour out of the way, get that completed. And that's going to be into sort of 26, 27 by the time we finish both the land and the marine side, because that then secures, as I said before, the lifeline to Jersey. Then it's about moving forward in a sensible way for the rest of the harbour.
Yeah. Can I quote from earlier? It was the second speaker who said, "There's nothing worse than a badly written brief." How do you go about educating the client before it's too late? If the client has a half-baked idea, the danger is you end up with a gold-plated, half-baked scheme, irrespective of the number of consultants who are engaged upon it.
So I'll answer that one. I think Ian touched on it, and I touched on it as well. It's the broader plan, and how do all of the briefs fit together? So, and I touched on, you know, a vision is usually a set of outcomes, and it's how do you turn those outcomes into something tangible? But also there's the connectivity. So if you're looking, if there's a vision statement that says we want to grow our economy by X, and then there's lots of different initiatives that could potentially drive that and drive towards that goal. So it's having a brief that's standalone, that isn't connected to other activities, potentially is going to be exactly what you said it would be. I mean, and of course it depends on what is trying to be achieved as well. If it's build a new building, then then the brief's relatively simple to write, because you spec the brief out and then you go to the market and off you go and you build it. And as long as it does all the things that it needs to do, then tick. So it very much depends on what it is you're trying to achieve. But I guess to kind of bring it back and conclude, the best briefs are connected with a broader vision and a broader set of outcomes. Hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I was interested to watch your presentation on the harbour at St Helier. A hot topic on the island, of course, is Liverpool Ferry Terminal, which doesn't appear to be a good example of how to procure a project.
I don't think that's for us to comment on.
Sorry, that the mic. It's just so we can pick up on the video later on. Okay, thank you. My name is Keith Karush. Touching on the question of the terminal, you showed us a nice shiny new terminal in the happening. Please could you tell us the cost of the Jersey terminal building alone? Also, who's funding the whole redevelopment there? And then as a tail end to all this, everyone in this room recognises that we have a cringeworthy bus station circa 1920s. Please would you go and see the Isle of Man government and tell them how to build a new bus station. Thank you.
So Ian, I'm going to chime in. I don't think we can answer the first question. So, but I'll let you answer the rest, mate.
Thank you. Sorry, so you threw me with the first.
The cost of the actual terminal.
That's fine, that's one. What was the second? So just be
and who's funding the whole project?
Ports of Jersey have a facility with the government of Jersey as their main stakeholder. So they have that as a separate work stream. So the way that we interrelate with each other, we provide the expected cost outturns. We go through with that with the Ports of Jersey. Obviously, they working with them. That's why I mentioned about affordability and about the phasing, because then obviously the facility that they actually have, because obviously they are confined. Every organisation, every client has an envelope within which they need to work, and therefore we work with them to develop that phasing to match where it is at the moment. So that's basically where it is. But I think one of the things with Ports of Jersey, one of the actual sort of key objectives is that it's about trying to be self-sustainable within that organisation in terms of that development, which is why time is of the essence, and therefore why we need to think about how we smooth that cost profile across, so we can, it's cost in, cost out, etc., to be able to continue that sort of funding as we work our way through.
We're particularly sensitive in this room. We're paying 70 million for a terminal in Liverpool, so that's what I'm focused on. What's that actual terminal building costing in Jersey?
But that funding isn't by the taxpayer in Jersey. The idea is that they are keen to do the funding through their own facilities. But again, in terms of how you attract, Adam spoke.
It must have a budget.
It does, but I'm sorry, I am literally right in the middle of a procurement exercise for that Elizabeth Harbour Marina. Forgive me, I've got to be really careful. And because, as I said, the procurement market is very difficult at the moment. I'm sorry, but I know exactly where I am with all my budgets, but as I said, I'm right in the middle of a procurement exercise, and I cannot. So I've got to be very careful commercially to be able to move this forward.
Yeah, I think to add to that, and you know, the key for success is when you're out in the market, you don't want the market to know what your budgets are, because funnily enough, the price that comes in will be around about the budget that you have. So, you know, and also, you know, there are client sensitivities. So I appreciate that you want to know, but you also need to appreciate that we can't. So, thank you.
How many times have you gone over budget in projects that you've done?
It's a very good question, and there is no straight answer, because it depends which lens you're looking at it through. So I advised on the super sewer that's being built through the centre of London. So I've been advising the government and the water regulator, and I sit above or sat above the people building it and Thames Water, who will ultimately operate it. So if you look at the investors, they have one financial model. If you look at the project team, they're being driven to another number. So it very much depends on the lens with which you're looking at what is classed as over budget. So it's very much how things are modelled. Of course, you start with a number, and certainly the bigger the project gets, and you'll start seeing shift in major infrastructure projects, and I've recently written a paper on this, is everyone is obsessed with one number and one date. And if projects are complex, or there's multiple projects, or there's programs, or they're mega projects, at the start of a project is when it's most uncertain. You know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. You get to the middle of the project, you're probably the most exposed in terms of risks, so you've probably got the biggest range of outcomes, and then the end is the end. So actually, as an industry, it's starting to shift away from one date and one number, which of course is very tangible for the public. I get that. But the reality is you're managing so many risks, and those risks will some will turn into issues, some you'll mitigate and have to spend some money and they go away. So actually, as you go through a project life cycle, you go from a very certain space and end up at a very certain space, but through periods there'll be great levels of uncertainty. And of course, again, it very, very much depends on which lens you're looking at it through. So there is, and what's out in the public domain, of course, no client in their right mind, you know, and there's another element to it. Just because you've awarded a contract at a certain price and everyone pats themselves on the back and thinks, I've got the best price out there. If you've just given a load of risk to the contractor, your entry price will be a very different number to your exit price. So it's about who is the right person to manage the risks based on the scope of work. And it's not always pushing it into the supply chain, because sometimes you'll end up paying for it 3 times. You pay your contractor, you pay your consultant, and you still have to put your hand in your pocket as a client. So there's not a lot out in the public domain, because a lot of it is private, and you've got investors sitting back there that don't want those numbers released. And of course, when you're managing at a portfolio level, you've got some wins and some loses, and actually it typically will balance out. So unfortunately, there is not a direct answer.